Now, in this video, I want to very quickly do a review of everything that we've learned inside of this application. All right? So let's get to it. We first began by talking about the difference between functional components and class-based components. I hope you remember that I said that with class-based components, it's generally easier to organize our code. Now, the reason for that is that if you start to look at this index.js file, it becomes pretty easy to understand what's going on at first glance. So we can open up this file and then instantly see that we have a class called app. It has states, it has a component didMount method, and it has some optional methods here to decide what content to render. But if you open up our hemisphere display component, understanding what's going on inside of here is a little challenging when you first open it up. Am I right? So you see something here called hemisphere config at the top, and I don't know about you, but I go like, wait, what hemisphere config? What's this thing? But on the other hand, if we would have a couple of helper functions inside this file, it would be a little bit more confusing for us to decide which one is our component. As you can see here, it seems a little challenging to decide what's going on. Okay, so I had to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the file to finally see the component inside of here. And if we wanted to, we could definitely take that component out and move it up to the top like so. And we'd probably not run into any issues. So we could put the functional component at the top, but you're going to find that in a lot of standards, people generally want to put the config objects and the helper functions at the top and then the functional components at the bottom. It's, kind of a community convention to put the component at the bottom. So right now I'm going to remove this. And the next thing that we learned about class-based components is that they can make use of the state system, which makes it easier to handle user input. And the next thing we learned was that with the class-based components, we can make use of lifecycle methods. We then spoke about some big rules of class-based components. So we said that we have to define a render method that's going to return some JSX. And right here, we've got the render method, and we return some JSX. Now, we are going to learn more about state, and right now, we can only use the state with class-based components, even though technically there are some exceptions to this rule. And then hopefully you learned that state is going to be a JavaScript object that's going to contain some amount of data that is relevant to a very particular component like this. All right, so next up, we had to initialize our state when our component was created. We first did that by using the constructor function. But then as we saw later on the constructor function, it wasn't really necessary for initializing our state, and that we can actually initialize the state as an instance property, as you see right here. So even though we're not defining constructor here, Babel gets it and puts it inside the constructor instead of making us do it. So actually, the constructor is going to exist anyway, so why not put it to good use? Then finally, we learned an important thing, that the only way to update our states is by calling the setState function. And then we saw an example of that inside of our getCurrentPosition callback right here. Now, we also went over the fact that when we call setStates, it would not overwrite, delete, or change our error message, and likewise for the latitude. This would only modify the latitude property, and it would not modify or change the error message. And then the last big topic that we spoke about was the component lifecycle methods. We said that the constructor function is the first function that gets called inside of a component. We can use it for data loading or for some kind of long-running operation, but community convention is to stick data loading requests into the component didMount method. The component didMount lifecycle method gets called exactly one time when our content first shows up on the screen. And then after that, anytime that the component gets updated by calling setState, the component didUpdate lifecycle method will be called. So we make use of that lifecycle method anytime that we need to fetch data or redo something every time that a component gets updated. And finally, there was the component will unmount lifecycle method. We said that it's essentially used for doing cleanup. There's not a whole lot of other uses for it besides that. So, that's a whole lot, but it is everything that we've covered in this section. So, hey, good job. You're sticking with it. We got more to get to, so why don't you take a break right here, have some rest even, and I'm going to meet you in the next section.